They gonna set my shit to motherfucking private, nigga. It's also necessary to completely falsify history. That's another way to overcome these sickly inhibitions, to make it look as if when we attack and destroy somebody, we're really protecting and defending ourselves against major aggressors and monsters and so on. There's been a huge effort since the Vietnam War to reconstruct the history of that. Too many people began to understand what was really going on, including plenty of soldiers and a lot of young people who were involved with the peace movement and others. That was bad. It was necessary to rearrange those bad thoughts and to restore some form of sanity, namely a recognition that whatever we do is noble and right. If we're bombing South Vietnam, that's because we're defending South Vietnam against somebody, namely the South Vietnamese, since nobody else was there. It's what the Kennedy intellectuals called defense against internal aggression in South Vietnam. That was the phrase used by Adlai Stevenson and others. It was necessary to make that the official and well understood picture. And that's worked pretty well. When you have total control over the media and the educational system and scholarship is conformist, you can get that across. One indication of it was revealed in a study done at the University of Massachusetts on attitudes toward the current Gulf crisis, a study of beliefs and attitudes in television watching. One of the questions asked in that study was, how many Vietnamese casualties would you estimate that there were during the Vietnam War? The average response of the part of Americans today is about 100,000. The official figure is about 2 million. The actual figure is probably 3 to 4 million. The people who conducted the study raised an appropriate question. What would we think about German political culture if, when you asked somebody today how many Jews died in the Holocaust and they estimated only about 300,000? What would that tell us about German political culture? They leave the question unanswered, but you can pursue it. What does it tell us about our culture? It tells us quite a bit. It's necessary to overcome the sickly inhibitions against the use of military force and other democratic deviations. In this particular case, it worked. This is true on every topic. Pick the topic you like, the Middle East, international terrorism, Central America, whatever it is. The picture of the world that's presented to the public has only the remotest relation to reality. The truth of the matter is buried under edifice after edifice of lies upon lies. It's all been a marvelous success from the point of view in deterring the threat of democracy, achieved under conditions of freedom, which is extremely interesting. It's not like a totalitarian state where it's done by force. These achievements are under conditions of freedom. If we want to understand our own society, we'll have to think about these facts. They are important facts, important for those who care about what kind of society they live in. Despite all of this, the dissident culture survived. It's grown quite a lot since the 1960s. In the 1960s, the dissident culture, first of all, was extremely slow in developing. There was no protest against the Indochina War until years after the United States had started bombing South Vietnam. When it did grow, it was a very narrow dissident movement, mostly students and young people. By the 1970s, that had changed considerably. Major popular movements had developed: the environmental movement, the feminist movement, the anti-nuclear movement, and others. In the 1980s, there was an even greater expansion to the solidarity movements, which is something very new and important in the history of at least American and maybe even world dissidents. These were movements that not only protested, but actually involved themselves, often intimately, in the lives of suffering people elsewhere. They learned a great deal from it and had quite a civilizing effect on mainstream America. All of this had a very large difference, or made a very large difference. Anyone who has been involved in this kind of activity for many years must be aware of this. I know myself that the kind of talks I give today in the most reactionary parts of the country, central Georgia, rural Kentucky, etc., are talks of the kind that I couldn't have given at the peak of the peace movement to the most active peace movement audience. Now you can give them anywhere. People may agree or not agree, but at least they understand what you're talking about, and there's some sort of common ground that you can pursue. These are all signs of the civilizing effect, despite all the propaganda, despite all the efforts to control thought and manufacture consent. Nevertheless, people are acquiring an ability and a willingness to think things through. Skepticism about power has grown, and attitudes have changed on many, many issues. It's kind of slow, maybe even glacial, but perceptible and important. Whether it's fast enough to make a significant difference in what happens in the world is another question. Just to take one familiar example of it, the famous gender gap. In the 1960s, attitudes of men and women were approximately the same on such matters as the martial virtues and the sickly inhibitions against the use of military force. Nobody, neither men nor women, were suffering from those sickly inhibitions in the early 1960s. The responses were the same. Everyone thought that the use of violence to suppress people out there was just right. Over the years, it's changed. The sickly inhibitions have increased all across the board. But meanwhile, a gap has been growing, and by now, it's a very substantial gap. According to polls, it's something like 25%. What's happened? What has happened is that there's some form of at least semi-organized popular movement that women are involved in. The feminist movement. Organization has its effects. It means that you discover that you're not alone. Others have the same thoughts that you do. You can reinforce your thoughts and learn more about what you think and believe. These are very informal movements, not like a membership organization, just a mood that involves interactions among people. It has a very noticeable effect. That's the danger of democracy. If organizations can develop, if people are no longer just glued to the tube, you may have all these funny thoughts arising in their heads, like sickly inhibitions against the use of military force. That has to be overcome, but it hasn't been overcome. Instead of talking about the last war, let me talk about the next war, because sometimes it's useful to be prepared instead of just reacting. There's a very characteristic development going on in the United States now. It's not the first country in the world that's done this. There are growing domestic, social, and economic problems. In fact, maybe catastrophes. Nobody in power has any intention of doing anything about them. If you look at the domestic programs of the administrations of the past 10 years, I include here the Democratic opposition. There's really no serious proposal about what to do about the severe problem of health, education, homelessness, joblessness, crime, soaring criminal populations, jails, deterioration in the inner cities, the whole raft of problems. You all know about them, and they're all getting worse. Just in the 2 years that George Bush had been in office, 3 million more children crossed the poverty line. The debt is zooming. Educational standards are declining. Real wages are now back to the level of about the late 1950s for much of the population, and nobody's doing anything about it. In such circumstances, you've got to divert the bewildered herd, because if they start noticing this, they may not like it, since they're the ones suffering from it. Just having them watch the Super Bowl and the sitcoms may not be enough. You have to whip them up into fear of enemies. In the 1930s, Hitler whipped them into a fear of the Jews and Gypsies. You had to crush them to defend yourselves. We have our ways too. Over the last 10 years, every year or two, some major monster is constructed that we have to defend ourselves against. There used to be that one that was always readily available, the Russians. You could always defend yourself against the Russians. But they're losing their attractiveness as an enemy, and it's getting harder and harder to use that one, so many new ones have to be conjured up. In fact, people have quite unfairly criticized George Bush for being unable to express or articulate what's really driving us now. That's very unfair. Prior to about the mid-1980s, when you were asleep, you would just play the record, the Russians are coming. But he lost that one, and he's got to make up new ones, just like the Reaganite public relations apparatus did in the 1980s. So it was international terrorists and narco traffickers and crazed Arabs and Saddam Hussein, the new Hitler, was going to conquer the world. They've got to keep coming up with one after another. You frighten the population, terrorize them, intimidate them so that they're too afraid to travel and cower in fear. Then you have a magnificent victory over Grenada, Panama, or some other defenseless third world army that you can pulverize before you even bother to look at them, which is just what happened. That gives relief. We were saved at the last minute. That's one of the ways in which you can keep the bewildered herd from paying attention to what's really going on around them. Keep them diverted and controlled. The next one that's coming along, most likely, will be Cuba. That's going to require a continuation of the illegal economic warfare, possibly a revival of the extraordinary international terrorism. The most major international terrorism organized has been the Kennedy administration's Operation Mongoose, then the things that followed along against Cuba. There's been nothing remotely comparable to it except perhaps the war against Nicaragua, if you call that terrorism. The World Court classified it as something more like aggression. There's always an ideological offensive that builds up a chimerical monster, then campaigns to have it crushed. You can't go on if they can fight back. That's much too dangerous. But if you're sure that they will be crushed, well, maybe we'll knock that one off and breathe another sigh of relief. Selective perception. This has been going on for quite a while. In May 1986, the memoirs of the released Cuban prisoner Armando Valladares came out. They quickly became a media sensation. I'll give you a couple of quotes. The media described his revelations as, quote, the definitive account of the vast system of torture and prison by which Castro punishes and obliterates political opposition. It was, quote, an inspiring and unforgettable account of the bestial prisons, inhumane torture, and record of state violence under yet another of this century's mass murderers, who we learn at last from this book has created a new despotism that has institutionalized torture as a mechanism of social control in the hell that was the Cuba that Valladares lived in. That's the Washington Post and New York Times in repeated reviews. Castro was described as, quote, a dictatorial goon. His atrocities were revealed in this book so conclusively that, quote, only the most lightheaded and cold-blooded Western intellectual will come to the tyrant's defense, said the Washington Post. Remember, this is the account of what happened to one man. So let's say it's all true. Let's raise no questions about what happened to the one man who's been tortured. At a White House ceremony marking Human Rights Day, he was singled out by Ronald Reagan for his courage in enduring the horrors and sadism of this bloody Cuban tyrant. He was then appointed the U.S. representative at the UN Human Rights Commission, where he has been able to perform signal services defending the Salvadoran and Guatemalan governments against charges that they conduct atrocities so massive that they make anything he suffered look pretty minor. That's the way things stand. That was May 1986. It was interesting, and it tells you something about the manufacture of consent. The same month, the surviving members of the human rights group of El Salvador, the leaders had been killed, were arrested and tortured, including Herbert Anaya, who was the director. They were sent to a prison, La Esperanza. While they were in prison, they continued their human rights work. They were lawyers. They continued taking affidavits. There were 432 prisoners in that prison. They got signed affidavits from 430 of them, in which they described under oath the torture that they had received, electrical torture and other atrocities, including in one case, torture by a North American U.S. major in uniform who was described in some detail. This is unusually explicit and comprehensive testimony, probably unique in its detail about what's going on in a torture chamber. This 160-page report of the prisoner's sworn testimony was sneaked out of prison, along with a videotape which was taken showing people testifying in prison about their torture. It was distributed by the Marin County Interfaith Task Force. The national press refused to cover it. The TV stations refused to run it. There was an article in the local Marin County newspaper, the San Francisco Examiner, and I think that's it. No one else would touch it. This was a time when there was more than a few lightheaded and cold-blooded Western intellectuals who were singing the praises of Jose Napoleon Duarte and of Ronald Reagan. Anaya was not the subject of any tributes. He didn't get on Human Rights Day. He wasn't appointed to anything. He was released in a prisoner exchange and then assassinated, apparently by the US-backed security forces. Very little information about that ever appeared. The media never asked whether exposure of the atrocities, instead of sitting on them and silencing them, might have saved his life. This tells you something about the way a well-functioning system of consent manufacturing works. In comparison with the revelations of Herbert Anaya in El Salvador, Valladares's memoirs are not even a pea next to the mountain. But you've got your job to do. That takes us toward the next war. I expect we're going to hear more and more of this until the next operation takes place. A few remarks about the last one. Let's turn finally to that. Let me begin with the University of Massachusetts study that I mentioned before. It has some interesting conclusions. In the study, people were asked whether they thought that the United States should intervene with forces to reverse illegal occupation or serious human rights abuses. By about 2-1, people in the United States thought we should. We should use force in the case of illegal occupation of land and severe human rights abuses. If the United States was to follow that advice, we would bomb El Salvador, Guatemala, Indonesia, Damascus, Tel Aviv, Cape Town, Turkey, Washington, and a whole list of other states. These are all cases of illegal occupation and aggression and severe human rights abuses. If you know the facts about that range of examples, you'll know very well that Saddam Hussein's aggression and atrocities fall well within the range. They're not the most extreme. Why doesn't anybody come to that conclusion? The reason is that nobody knows. In a well-functioning propaganda system, nobody would know what I'm talking about when I list that range of examples. If you bother to look, you find that those examples are quite appropriate. Take one that was ominously close to being perceived during the Gulf War. In February, right in the middle of the bombing campaign, the government of Lebanon requested Israel to observe UN Security Council Resolution 425, which called on it to withdraw immediately and unconditionally from Lebanon. That resolution dates from March 1978. There have since been 2 subsequent resolutions calling for the immediate and unconditional withdrawal of Israel from Lebanon. Of course, it doesn't observe them because the United States backs Israel in maintaining that occupation. Meanwhile, southern Lebanon is terrorized. There are big torture chambers with horrifying things going on. It's used as a base for attacking other parts of Lebanon. Since 1978, Lebanon was invaded. The city of Beirut was bombed. Over 20,000 people were killed, about 80% of them civilians, and robbery was inflicted. And civilians. Hospitals were destroyed, and more terror, looting, and robbery was inflicted. There it is. All fine. The United States backed it. That's just one case. You didn't see anything in the media about it or any discussion about whether Israel and the United States should observe UN Security Council Resolution 425 or any of the other resolutions, nor did anyone call for the bombing of Tel Aviv, although by the principles upheld by 2/3 of the population, we should. After all, that's illegal occupation and severe human rights abuses. If you notice this, what he is saying is that Israel, backed by the United States, was engaged in an occupying terroristic sort of force while in Lebanon, completely terrorizing the people of Lebanon. The United States is like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't give a fuck. We're with Israel. We don't give a fuck what Israel does. Just like we don't give a fuck now. Right now, Israel is committing a genocide of the people of Gaza. They hate Palestinians, okay? They absolutely hate every Palestinian. They look at every single breathing Palestinian as an enemy combatant. Even the children, which is practically all of the Gazans. Practically all of the people of Gaza are children, damn near. You know what I mean? And they're just bombing them. And whoever the fuck they don't murder outright, they're trying to starve to death. But the United States is like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't see it. Israel's our friend. And it's like, make the fuck out of here. Because this is what the United States does. We fund terroristic states. We do terrorism ourselves. Okay, so we'll never actually call out terrorism when it's actual terrorism by our people. We only call it terrorism when it's motherfuckers that ain't aligned with us, okay? When it's some brown country who we are not aligned with, now it's terrorism. When it's Afghanistan, it's terrorism. When it's Iraq, it's terrorism. But when we do it, when Israel does it, oh, it's not terrorism. What the fuck are you talking about? It's not genocide. This isn't an occupation. What are you talking about? Like, no, everything we do is on the up and up. Even if what we did is exactly like what the terrorists that we would call terrorists do. Even if we do the exact same thing, and even if we do the exact same thing, but maybe even 10 times more sadistically, we still won't call it terrorism because we're in the United States. If we do it, it's okay. If you do it, it's not. Because democracy or some shit, I don't fucking know. The United States is trash. Anyway, all fine. The United States backs it. That's just one case. You didn't see anything in the media about it or any discussion about whether Israel and the United States should observe UN Security Council Resolution 425 or any of the other resolutions, nor did anyone call for the bombing of Tel Aviv, although by the principles upheld by 2/3 of the population, we should. After all, that's illegal occupation and severe human rights abuses. And that's just one case. There are much worse ones. The Indonesia invasion of East Timor knocked off about another 200,000 people. They all look minor by that one. That was strongly backed by the United States and is still going on with major United States diplomatic and military support. We can go on and on. The Gulf War. That tells you how a well-functioning propaganda system works. People can believe that when we use force against Iraq and Kuwait, it's because we really observe the principle that illegal occupation and human rights abuses should be met by force. They don't see what it would mean if those principles were applied to US behavior. That's a success of propaganda and quite a spectacular success, if I must say. Let's take a look at another case. If you look closely at the coverage of the war since August 1990, you'll notice that there are a couple of striking voices missing. For example, there's an Iraqi Democratic opposition, in fact, a very courageous and quite substantial Iraqi Democratic opposition. They, of course, function in exile because they couldn't survive in Iraq. They are in Europe primarily. They are bankers, engineers, architects, people like that. They are articulate, they have voices, and they speak. The previous February, when Saddam Hussein was still George Bush's favorite friend and trading partner, they actually came to Washington, according to Iraqi Democratic opposition sources, with a plea for some kind of support for a demand of theirs calling for a parliamentary democracy in Iraq. They were totally rebuffed because the United States had no interest in it. There was no reaction to this in the public record. Since August, it became a little harder to ignore their existence. In August, we suddenly turned against Saddam Hussein after having favored him for many years. Here was an Iraqi Democratic opposition who ought to have some thoughts about the matter. They would be happy to see Saddam Hussein drawn and quartered. He killed their brothers, tortured their sisters, and drove them off the country. They have been fighting against his tyranny throughout the whole time that Ronald Reagan and George Bush were cherishing him. Well, what about their voices? Take a look at the national media and see how much you can find out about the Iraqi Democratic opposition from August through March 1991. You can't find a word. It's not that they're inarticulate. They have statements, proposals, calls, and demands. If you look at them, you find that they're indistinguishable from those of the American peace movement. They're against Saddam Hussein, and they're against the war against Iraq. They don't want their country destroyed. What they want is a peaceful resolution, and they knew perfectly well that it might have been achievable. That's the wrong view, and therefore they're out. We don't hear a word about the Iraqi Democratic opposition. If you want to find out about them, pick up the German press or the British press. They don't say much about them, but they're less controlled than we are, and they say something at least. This is a spectacular achievement of propaganda. First, that the voices of the Iraqi Democrats are completely excluded, and second, that nobody notices it. That's interesting too. It takes a really deeply indoctrinated population not to notice that we're not hearing the voices of the Iraqi Democratic opposition and not asking the question, why? And then finding out the obvious answer, because the Iraqi Democrats have their own thoughts. They agree with the international peace movement, and therefore they're out. Let's take the question of the reasons for the war. Reasons were offered for the war. The reasons are aggressors cannot be rewarded and aggression must be reversed by the quick resort to violence. That was the reason for the war. There was basically no other reason advanced. Can that possibly be the reason for the war? Does the United States uphold those principles that aggressors cannot be rewarded and that aggression must be reversed by a quick resort to violence? I won't insult your intelligence by running through the facts, but the fact is, those arguments could be refuted in 2 minutes by a literate teenager. However, they never were refuted. Take a look at the media, the liberal commentators and critics, the people who testified in Congress, and see whether anybody questioned the assumption that the United States stands up to those principles. Has the United States opposed its own aggression in Panama and insisted on bombing Washington to reverse it? When the South African occupation of Namibia was declared illegal in 1969, did the United States impose sanctions on food and medicine? Did it go to war? Did it bomb Cape Town? No. It carried out 20 years of quiet diplomacy. It wasn't very pretty during those 20 years. In the years of the Reagan-Bush administration alone, about 1.5 million people were killed by South Africa just in the surrounding countries. Forget what was happening in South Africa and Namibia. Somehow, that didn't sear our sensitive souls. We continued with quite diplomacy and ended up with ample reward for the aggressors. They were given the major port in Namibia and plenty of advantages that took into account their security concerns. Where is this principle that we uphold? Again, it's child's play to demonstrate that those couldn't possibly have been the reasons for going to war because we don't uphold those principles. But nobody did it. That's what's important. And nobody bothered to point out the conclusion that follows. No reason was given for going to war. None. No reason was given for going to war that could be refuted by a literal teenager in about 2 minutes. That could not be refuted by a teenager in less than 2 minutes. That, again, is the hallmark of a totalitarian culture. It ought to frighten us that we are so deeply totalitarian that we can be driven to war without any reason being given for it and without anybody noticing Lebanon's request or caring. It's a very striking fact. Oh, this is the next page. Okay. Right before the bombing started in mid-January, a Washington Post ABC poll revealed something interesting. People were asked if Iraq would agree to withdraw from Kuwait in return for Security Council consideration of the problem of Arab-Israeli conflict, would you be in favor of that? By about 2-1, the population was in favor of that. So was the whole world, including the Iraqi Democratic Opposition. So it was reported that 2/3 of the American population were in favor of that. Presumably, the people who were in favor of that thought that they were the only ones in the world to think so. Certainly nobody in the press had said that it would be a good idea. The orders from Washington have been, we're supposed to be against linkage, that is, diplomacy, and therefore everybody goose-stepped on command and everybody was against diplomacy. Trying to find commentary in the press, you can find a column by Alex Cockburn in the Los Angeles Times who argued that it would be a good idea. The people who were answering that question thought I'm alone, but that's what I think. Suppose they knew that they weren't alone, that other people thought it, like the Iraqi Democratic Opposition, for instance. Suppose that they knew that this was not hypothetical, that in fact Iraq had made exactly such an offer. It had been released by high U.S. officials just 8 days earlier. On January 2nd, these officials had released an Iraqi offer to withdraw totally from Kuwait in return for consideration by the Security Council of the Arab-Israeli conflict and the problem of weapons of mass destruction. The United States have been refusing to negotiate this issue since well before the invasion of Kuwait. Suppose that people had known that the offer was actually on the table and that it was widely supported and that, in fact, it's exactly the kind of thing that any rational person would do if they were interested in peace, as we do in other cases, in the rare cases that we do want to reverse aggression. Suppose that it had been known. You can make your own guesses, but I would assume that the 2/3 would probably have risen to 98% of the population. Here you have the great successes of propaganda. Probably not one person who answered the poll knew any of the things I've mentioned. The people thought that they were alone, and therefore it was possible to proceed with the war without opposition. There was a good deal of discussion about whether sanctions would work. You had the head of the CIA come up and discuss whether sanctions would work. However, there was no discussion of a much more obvious question. Had sanctions already worked? The answer is yes. Apparently they had, probably by late August, very likely by late December. It was very hard to think of any other reason for the Iraqi offers of withdrawal, which were authenticated or, in some cases, released by high U.S. officials who described them as serious and negotiable. So the real question is, had sanctions already worked? Was there a way out? Was there a way out in terms quite acceptable to the general population, the world at large, and the Iraqi Democratic Opposition? These questions were not discussed, and it's crucial for a well-functioning propaganda system that they not be discussed. That enables the chairman of the Republican National Committee to say that if any Democrat had been in office, Kuwait would not be liberated today. He can say that, and no Democrat would get up and say that if I were president, it would have been liberated not only today, but 6 months ago, because there were opportunities then that I would have pursued, and Kuwait would have been liberated without killing tens of thousands of people and without causing an environmental catastrophe. No Democrat would say that because no Democrat took that position. Henry Gonzalez and Barbara Boxer took that position, but the number of people who took it is so marginal that it's virtually non-existent. Given the fact that almost no Democratic politician would say that, Clayton Yetter is free to make his statements. When Scud missiles hit Israel, nobody in the press applauded. Again, that's an interesting fact about a well-functioning propaganda system. We might ask, why not? After all, Saddam Hussein's arguments were as good as George Bush's arguments. What were they, after all? Well, let's just take Lebanon. Saddam Hussein says that he can't stand annexation. He can't let Israel annex the Syrian Golan Heights and East Jerusalem in opposition to the unanimous agreement of the Security Council. He can't stand annexation. He can't stand aggression. Israel has been occupying southern Lebanon since 1978 in violation of Security Council resolutions that it refuses to abide by. In the course of that period, it attacked all of Lebanon, still bombs most of Lebanon at will. He can't stand it. He might have read the Amnesty International report on Israeli atrocities in the West Bank. His heart is bleeding. He can't stand it. Sanctions can't work because the United States vetoes them. Negotiations won't work because the United States blocks them. What's left but force? He's been waiting for years, 13 years in the case of Lebanon, 20 years in the case of the West Bank. You've heard that argument before. The only difference between that argument and the one you heard is that Saddam Hussein could truly sit could truly say sanctions and negotiations can't work because the United States blocks them. But George Bush couldn't say that because sanctions apparently had worked, and there was every reason to believe that negotiations could work, except that he adamantly refused to pursue them, saying explicitly there will be no negotiations right through. Did you find anybody in the press who pointed that out? No. It's a triviality. It's something that, again, a literate teenager could figure out in a minute. But nobody pointed it out. No commentator, no editorial writer. And that, again, is the sign of a very well-run totalitarian culture. It shows that the manufacture of consent is working. So let's comment about this. We could give many examples. You can make them up as you go along. Take the idea that Saddam Hussein is a monster about to conquer the world, widely believed in the United States, and not unrealistically. It was drilled into people's heads over and over again. He's about to take everything. We've got to stop him now. How did he get that powerful? This is a small third world country without an industrial base. For 8 years, Iraq had been fighting Iran. That's post-revolutionary Iran, which had decimated its officer corps and most of its military force. Iraq had a little bit of support in that war. It was backed by the Soviet Union, the United States, Europe, the major Arab countries, and the Arab oil producers. It couldn't defeat Iran, but all of a sudden, it's ready to conquer the world. Did you find anybody who pointed that out? The fact of the matter is, this was a third world country with a peasant army. It's now being conceded that there was a ton of disinformation about the fortifications, the chemical weapons, etc. But did you find anybody who pointed it out? No. You found virtually nobody who pointed it out, and that's typical. Notice that this was done 1 year after exactly the same thing was done with Manuel Noriega. Manuel Noriega is a minor thug by comparison with George Bush's friend Saddam Hussein, or George Bush's other friends in Beijing, or George Bush himself. For that matter, in comparison with them, Manuel Noriega is a pretty minor thug. Bad, but not a world-class thug of the kind we like. He was turned into a creature larger than life. He was going to destroy us, leading the narco traffickers. We had to quickly move in and smash him, killing a couple hundred or maybe 1,000 people, restoring the power of the tiny, maybe 8% white oligarchy, and putting U.S. military officers in control at every level of the political system. We had to do all those things because, after all, we had to save ourselves, or we're going to be destroyed by this monster. 1 year later, the same thing was done by Saddam Hussein. Did anybody point it out? Anybody point out that what had happened or why? You'll have to look pretty hard for that. Notice that this is not all that differs from what the Creel Commission did when it turned a pacifistic population into raving hysterics who wanted to destroy everything German to save ourselves from Huns who were tearing the arms off Belgian babies. The techniques are maybe more sophisticated with television and lots of money going into it, but it's pretty traditional. I think the issue, to come back to my original comment, is not simply disinformation in the Gulf crisis. The issue is much broader. It's whether we want to live in a free society or whether we want to live under what amounts to a form of self-imposed totalitarianism, with the bewildered herd marginalized, directed elsewhere, terrified, screaming patriotic slogans, fearing for their lives, and admiring with awe the leader who saved them from destruction, while the educated masses goose step on command and repeat the slogans they're supposed to repeat, and the society deteriorates at home. We end up serving as a mercenary enforcer state, hoping that others are going to pay us to smash up the world. Those are the choices. That's the choice that you have to face. The answer to those questions is very much in the hands of people like you and me. I guess I'll just end it there for a moment, man. I gotta go get some fucking coffee for a second. Hold on, dog. I ain't gonna end the live, though. But let me see what y'all been saying. What is he reading? It's called Noam Chomsky's Media Control, the Spectacular Achievements of Propaganda. And that down there at the bottom where it says the role of the media in contemporary politics forces us to ask what kind of a world and what kind of society we want to live in. And in particular, in what sense of democracy do we want this to be a democratic society? That's the very first thing he says on the very first page. Like, let me get to it. God damn it. I did flip it back. The fuck? Say, the role of the media in contemporary politics forces us to ask what kind of a world and what kind of a society we want to live in. And in particular, in what sense of democracy do we want this to be a democratic society? Let me begin by blah, 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 blah. Like my handwriting. Ha-ha! My nigga. Hold up. Man, I'm about to put this motherfucker right here. Right here, player. Bitch. Hold up. That's what I have to do, goddammit. That's what I have to motherfucking do. Bafaboo! Fuck, we right here. We right here, son. Fuck, that coffee is hot, son. Thanks for reading. It's one thing I actually enjoy so very much. My pleasure. I do it more often, but I don't be knowing, man. I started out to even read that one because it's not really in line with what I've been doing lately. That's more about the media and propaganda and how it's worked successfully in order to pretty much manufacture the consent of the population, which is oftenly referred to as the bewildered herd or the stupid masses. That's what they refer to us as. In order to get us to acquiesce to the demands and the wishes and the machinations of the ruling class, the business community. So that doesn't really line up with this anti-Christian tirade I've been on, but you know. It's informative information nonetheless that I just want to get disseminated amongst the public, you know. What's up there? What is it? Lao chant? I'm not sure. Yeah. Exactly, Dave. Yeah. Where my motherfucking bong at? Oh, I left it in there. All right, enough of that. This guy. The fuck? Where the Jesus heads at? This bud's for you. All right, I'm good. Oh, shit. This why the fuck my channel ain't getting monetized. This shit here. Fuck. Yeah, man. Yeah, Dave, what's up, son? Do that shit. What's up, Mr. President? I gotta call you Mr. President. Mr. President, sir. They used to smoke so much. We take so many dabs. I quit once now. I have anxiety when I try to smoke. It sucks. Who needs monetization when you got the Zaza? I feel you. I don't need it. I don't give a fuck about the monetization, son. I mean, I can't anyway. I mean, I'm not willing to change shit. Like, I'm not willing to edit nothing. I'm not cutting nothing out. I'm not hiding anything. I'm not doing shit, son. What you see is what you get. You know what I'm saying? And that's just period, you know. Look how fruity this lighter looks. That motherfucker. Wait, King. What the fuck even is that? Oh, do it for flicks. That's what it say. Doing it for flicks. He crying for our Lord and Savior Jesus. What up, homie? I'm choking on swag. Yuck. The fuck? Nah, son. I'm just jealous, B. You're just jealous, my ninja. I rolled up 4 blunts. I just decided to smoke this because this was what was left after I rolled the 4 blunts. So I was like, let me go ahead and kill this little shit out here. Me, I packed it nice too. I probably need to get some of that. I'll get some shit on this side. Yeah, I think that shit gone down, son. For the most part. Where Baffaboo? Get over here, boy. What in the hell you doing, son? Get in there. It's relevant as fuck always, but I'm curious. There was a particular event that made you choose this one. What? What? I mean, I'm not against Rick and Morty. I just never seen the show. Therefore, it's fair to say that I'm not a fan. Not that, like I said, I don't have anything against it. I've just never seen the show. Like, but I don't typically watch. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's some like philosophical aspects to a lot of Rick and Morty. Like I've seen, like some people do analysis, like a sort of psychoanalysis on Rick and Morty. So I've seen that, you know. So I know there's that element of it, but to the average watcher, I would imagine, of that show, they probably wouldn't get it. You know what I mean? They would probably get maybe the surface level shit, but not as deep as they was going with it, you know, as they were analyzing it from a philosophical standpoint. But typically I tend to watch really only things that are educational. You know, like I don't know if y'all can see my subscriptions, but I'm subscribed to like a lot of Hassan Piker's channels, or at least the Hasanabi Complex. I know there's a lot of people that make content. Like they farm a lot of his content, you know what I'm saying, and make channels dedicated to his clips. And I'm subscribed to, I feel like for a minute I was subscribed to damn near all of them. But there's those, and then I'm subscribed to like a few sciencey shits, science channels and philosophy channels. I'm already some religious channels, just meaning that these are, for instance, like Alex O'Connor, like I'm subscribed to his channel. I'm subscribed to the Lawrence Krauss Origins podcast. What is it? The one that Science Star Talk. Yeah, that's the name of the podcast with Neil deGrasse Tyson and Chuck Nice, I guess, is on there a lot. But so yeah, I'll watch that, and then like, you know, a few other like atheist leaning channels. But then also like because I just always want to hear the arguments that Christians have when it comes to this biblical shit. And I want to hear the arguments from the best of them. Not people like fucking, I feel like one of the best defenders of Christianity is like William Lane Craig. Like I think he's probably the best, even though he sucks. Like, because I've read a lot of his like I've seen a lot of his debates, and I've seen interviews of just him, you know. So I know that he's a pretty articulate, a very, you know, he's an excellent defender of Christianity. For you know, especially if you're someone who doesn't like do the research like he has in order to manipulate it, you know, because that's knowledge right there. Like that's intelligence. Like you have a sufficient amount of knowledge, and then once you have that knowledge, you're able to manipulate that knowledge. You're able to manipulate that information to your benefit, and that's what he's been able to do successfully. Like he makes good arguments for Christianity, even though they're not sufficient. I mean, well, and a lot of them are just it's a lot of presupposition he does, along with just committing logical fallacies, but mostly just a lot of presupposition shit and a lot of God in the gaps type shit. Like but compared to everybody else, like he's the best. But so I like to watch a lot of his shit to hear the arguments from one of the best defenders of Christianity, just to see like, all right, well, let's hear it, you know. I've not yet been convinced, not yet been persuaded. And he's, in my opinion, one of the best. So if he can't do it, you sons of bitches can't do it. You know what I mean? You petty fucking peasant, unread, uneducated sons of fucks. You can't defend Christianity and in such a way that will convince me to convert. You can't do it. The best of the best can't do it. So you definitely can't. You can't even be bothered to read your fucking Bible, you hypocritical cunts. So now, if I were to if there were some way we could take out all the information that I have from doing all the study and research, then maybe I could be a Christian. Make me dumber, and then I could probably be one, sure. Make me more credulous, more gullible. You know what I mean? Lead more with my feelings as opposed to my brain. Sure, I could probably be a Christian. Right, Christian tonight. But it's unlikely to happen. I can't know anything for certain, but it's unlikely to happen. I mean, hell, I could have an injury, some brain injury tomorrow and become a Christian tomorrow. But it's, again, unlikely to happen. The brain injury, that's probably more likely to happen, but that's what's going to be required in order to get me to become a Christian. And surely you don't want that for me, do you, Christians? The correct response from a Christian should be, if that's God's will. If God will it, then I'm on board. Are you an atheist? Yes. Isn't that obvious at this point? And don't ask me what's up with the devil shit. I've already covered that in another video. I've articulated my response to that quite well. I can't do a better job than that. Yes, I'm an atheist. No, I do not believe in the devil. I get it, because when I was a Jehovah's Witness, we were taught that, I don't remember what verse it was in the Bible, but somewhere I suppose it said that God said you cannot serve two masters. That you either serve me or you serve the devil. There is no in between, there's no straddling the fence. So if you say you do not worship me, then by default, you worship the devil. Now, I used to agree to that when I was a Christian, but now it's that's not, I get it if that's how that God wants to look at things. It's either me or you're against me. I guess if that's how you want to look at it, sure, but I don't look at it that way. I'm not necessarily against anyone. I'm not even convinced of your existence to be against you. I'm only judging by what is written in this dumbass, ancient-ass book. And according to that, you are a wicked fuck. How many people did you have to murder and slaughter innocently? Even if you felt like, oh, the whole city is wicked, I need to kill them all. Well, what did the babies do? What did the animals do? You just decide, fuck it. What did the birds do? What did the squirrels or whatever other animals were around at that time in that particular part of the world? What did they do? Why did they have to die? Just because you felt like, oh, these motherfuckers are just all so wicked. I gotta kill them all. Pregnant women, babies, animals. I don't give a shit. I'm God. I can do whatever I want. Fuck them, With the exception of Lot and his two daughters and his wife, of course. But I already made that video. I'm not doing that again. Why would I care about you and your stuff? You shouldn't. I don't care about you and yours. Now, if you're a Christian, you should. You definitely should. At least according to Jesus. But you ain't got to listen to Jesus. You already aren't. You know what I'm saying? You aren't actively loving your neighbor. You know what I mean? And by neighbor, he didn't mean that motherfucker that lived next door. You know what he meant. He meant your fellow man. But y'all just can't be bothered. Y'all see my content and just got to be like, you know what, you motherfucker, you're going to hell. We'll see. You'll find out one day, motherfucker. It's almost as like they can't wait. They wish they could be there to see it. You know what I mean? And they know they do. Technically they're right. Again, it's in the Bible, but I don't remember exactly which verse. But God was basically like, yeah, you motherfuckers will be in heaven and you'll be able to look down at all the people who didn't make it and just be giddy. Just look at all of them down there, just suffering, gnawing and gnashing teeth. You know what I'm saying? Just loving it. I know y'all want that. It's so disgusting. You know what I'm saying? Jesus may love me, but you motherfuckers sure don't. Y'all are like begging for my destruction. Because y'all won't make any sincere attempts to get me to convert. Not that it'll work, but I mean, that's not supposed to matter to you. You're supposed to keep on preaching the good news of the kingdom. Trying to convert as many souls in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, baptized in the faith. Not cheering on my destruction. Not that there's anything to cheer on. Like, get the fuck out of here. All of that shit is nonsense, son. All of it. Do you love God? That's a dumbass question. Next. We have free will to choose life or death. Free will is an illusion, Austin. You do not have free will. Okay? Now, I would recommend you do some research into free will, because I have. You know what I mean? I've heard it from at least 2 different authors between 4 different books. Oh, wait, no, it was 3 different authors. I almost forgot. But one of them had 2 books that I read. And they covered this issue of free will. And it doesn't exist. Nope. Not when you think philosophically about this shit, which, of course, you can't be bothered to do. So, yeah, it doesn't exist. I'm fine with it. I'm fine with whatever this thing is that we think is free will, this illusion of free will. I'm fine with that. But make no mistake, I am aware that it is an illusion. Unlike you. But whatever, you're still heavily indoctrinated. You haven't done any research. You haven't read anything. You're just a credulous dum-dum. And it's not your fault. And since it's not your fault, maybe I shouldn't call you a dum-dum, but that's all right. I'm a dum-dum. What? Dude, I smoke cigarettes. How dumb can you be? Like, that is the most dumbest thing that one can do. Well, that's not the dumbest thing, but it's pretty fucking dumb. And yet I do it, knowing it's dumb. So it's not, you're not the only one, okay? Don't get so in your feelings, motherfuckers, when I call you guys dum-dums, okay? We're all fucking dum-dums about one thing or another. I'm just trying to make an effort to be less of a dum-dum about as many things as possible, with which I need to concern myself, you know. And I don't feel the need to concern myself with Islam. I don't need to concern myself with Jainism, Zoroastrianism, Satanism, witchcraft, Hinduism, Shintoism. I don't need to worry about any of that. Only Christianity. Y'all the only ones causing a ruckus. You're the only sons of bitches that I see when I'm downtown Chicago or Michigan. When I'm, you know what I mean? Or in Detroit, rather. With your fucking loudspeakers and your fucking microphones talking about, come to Jesus! When motherfuckers are just trying to go about their day and shop and, you know, see the sights, get their tourism on. And here you sons of bitches with your matching shirts and your fucking speaker. The Lord Jesus, such and such, you know what I'm saying? Always. Like, y'all the motherfuckers constantly inundating a motherfucker with your bullshit ideology. When we're just trying to live our lives. And then you got the nerve to be like, why do you give Christianity such a hard time? Why can't people just believe what they believe? Well, tell that to your street epistemologists. Okay? Tell that to those motherfuckers. So next time you, Christian, see one of those Christians in the street with their fucking speaker and their microphone trying to get people to come and talk to them about Jesus, or kind of like, can I tell you about the word and all that shit? Go up to them and be like, excuse me, can you just let people live and believe as they wish? Why must you push your beliefs on others? So until you check your own fucking people, I'm going to continue to do this, okay? Because it's very one-sided as far as I'm concerned. Very one-sided. You don't see atheists everywhere you fucking go pushing atheism and science on you and shit. But everywhere you fucking go, Jesus this, Jesus that, bless you, bless that, be blessed, have a blessed day. You know, Jesus loves you, billboards and the like. Every fucking where. People with their bullshit fucking bumper stickers and license plates. And it's Jesus, 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 Jesus. Yet everything around them is fucked up. Where the fuck is this Jesus at? Besides on the bumper of your fucking bullshit car. You know what I mean? Where the fuck is your Jesus? All right. Chilling. Chilling like a motherfucking villain. Some good coffee, man. I drink chock full of nuts. That's my favorite one, chock full of nuts. And then after that, probably U-Ban, I guess. I don't fucking know. Whatever they be having at the grocery store, just some regular ass shit. I don't really fuck with like Folgers and Maxwell House. But U-Ban is all right. Chock full of nuts is the shit. Fucking... What else I be getting? Or anytime I can find a Highlander grog. I love... That's... Okay. That is my favorite coffee flavor. Highlander grog. I love a Highlander grog coffee. That is just my absolute favorite. I can never find it in the big dumbass can like you can, like chock full of nuts and Folgers or whatever. It's always in like those little bags and the fancy, expensive fucking... It's always over there. You know what I mean? So I never get it because it's always over there. You know what I'm saying? Like, I ain't got time for that. That's why I don't get like Death Wish or none of that other fancy shit. Like, no. Who the fuck is this for anyway? Like, nigga, I'm poor. Okay? I'm a broke bitch. All right? I need the big ass can and I need it for like $10.99, dog. No more, please. You know. I mean, can we just keep the sale going for $10.99 and never raise it? You know. I don't need that expensive shit. Coffee's coffee. Either way, I'm a pour a cup, forget I poured it, and then end up microwaving it, and it's all... who cares? I'm not spending the money on coffee. You know what I mean? Praise the Emperor of Mankind. That's right. What's good, pimpin'? Shit. Chilling, baby. Chilling, son. I'm gonna get back to reading probably around 2 o'clock if anyone's interested. You know what I'm saying? It won't be that book though. I finished the other book I was reading, 30 Arguments Against the Existence of God. I already finished that book again for the 4th time. If you want though, we can read my second favorite book, which is 50 Reasons People Give for Believing in a God. That is my second favorite. I read that one 3 times. And I'm eager to read it a 4th, you know. Jeebus is coming. Jeebus is coming. You stupid. You don't know me because of 5 comments I've made, but you're right. I'd go to hell if I die right now. I mean, but you know what? There's no reason to believe that there's a hell. You know what I mean? There's no reason at all. There's no reason to believe that there's a hell, no more than there's a reason to believe that there's a Mordor. Okay? There's just no reason to believe in it. In fact, if you look at the Old Testament, it never refers to hell as a place of eternal torment and fire and pain. And it never says that in the Old Testament. That was some new shit that came about with Jesus because, of course, you know what I mean? Mr. All-Loving, Mr. Oh, I just bring peace, even though he clearly said I came to bring a sword, but whatever. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, so if you want to believe the New Testament, fine, then it's bloody and torment and torture. Or you can believe the Old Testament, where it's literally just a grave. That's it. You know. That's it. Or believe some other concept of hell. Why do you have to just default to the Christian hell? Look into other religions' hells and other religions' heavens or their concepts of some sort of a heaven. Look into that. And you will have no more reason to believe that that shit is any more true than the Christian shit. It's all the same, dog. In fact, it's relative. it's just relative. Like, if you was over there, then your concept of hell is what it is, if there even is one. Or heaven is what it is. Or if you was over here, then that's what you default to. You know what I'm saying? Which a lot of the imagery and the ideas, most of which came from like Dante. You know what I'm saying? Just borrowing from other cultures and shit as usual. Like, there's really nothing authentic about Christianity. Like, it's just an amalgamation of practices and beliefs from shit that had already been around for the most part. You know what I'm saying? Like, the whole Immaculate Conception, that's not even unique. You know what I'm saying? Fucking the whole suffering savior fucking came back after 3 days, people saw it, became God, whatever. That's not even unique to Christianity. Jesus ain't even the first to do that. In fact, that whole narrative is most likely stolen from, I think it was like Apollonius or some shit. It's like, either way, that narrative isn't even original. Like, I'm telling you, once you start to do the research, you'll come away like, wait, hold on, dog. Because certain shit will just start to make sense. That's why I did the research. It's not enough to just look at the Bible and see what the Bible says. Because a lot of times, you can't just read it for what it says. You need to look at other scriptures. You need to look and see, like, because you know how, like, motherfuckers will say shit. Like, for instance, the sun will set at 7:30. Let's just say that for an example. Well, what does it mean for the sun to set? Like, we all know what it means, but it's not actually about the, like, by the definition of the word set, it's not going to do that. Like, that's not what, it's not going to do any fucking thing. You know what I'm saying? It's just how our earth rotates that it gives the illusion that the sun is moving. Like, you know what I mean? But we use that kind of language. And so now, it's not like it's unique to our generation or anything. Like, this shit been going on. And that's what they're saying. Like, maybe some of the language that they use in the scriptures weren't necessarily literal, but they could have meant it like that. But now you got to contend with that phenomenon. So, like, where in the Bible were they just talking like that? Like, you know, like colloquially and not necessarily like literally. You know what I mean? Like, so there's that. On top of, how was even writing done back in the day? Who could read and write? Was everyone reading and writing a phenomenon that was widespread? Or was that something that didn't come about till later? What does it even mean to read or write? If you can just read and write your name, does that mean you can read and write? Or what if you could just write, but you can't understand what you've just written? Does that mean you can read, or does that mean you can write? You know, like, there was lots of different things. Like, if you can just sign your name, that was like a big thing. Like, so for a long time in certain parts of the world at that time, just being able to sign your name was considered being able to read and write. And a lot of the scribes who were transcribing the text or whatever at that time, some of them couldn't even read. And then a lot of what was written already, just the way they wrote at the time, and a lot of times they didn't use any spaces. The words would just be all one word. You know what I mean? And depending on what the context, what the words were, it could be read to mean two different things. And who's to say which interpretation it was supposed to mean? You know what I mean? Like, there's so much of that going on in the Bible. And you wouldn't know it unless you went and did some research on its historicity. You know what I'm saying? And that's what I've been doing. I've already read like 4 fucking books on the historicity of the Bible alone. You know what I'm saying? Like, so, because I want to know. So therefore, if you question anything I say, I can give you some references. And it won't just be those authors and those books, because I can give you their citations and where they came to their conclusions. You know what I'm saying? And just listen to the arguments that are being proposed. So, and this is someone who's an atheist. I don't even believe this shit. I do more reading of the Bible and research about the historicity of Jesus and the scriptures than your average fucking Christian who doesn't read their fucking Bible. You know what I mean? It's wild to me. But I also read a lot of science books. So I'm not just reading shit from your position, I'm also reading them from mine. And I'm also starting to get into more philosophers. Just to hear them out, I guess. Not that it fucking matters. I just want to know what they said. Because for some shit, Aristotle was spot on. Other shit, Aristotle was completely wrong and needed to get out of his feelings. You know what I'm saying? And the same could be said for Immanuel Kant. You know what I'm saying? Perhaps even Descartes, but, you know, I haven't heard yet anything too controversial from Descartes, but I'm sure it exists. Just hadn't found it. But I haven't been looking either, in all honesty. So, yes, I'm straight, but what the fuck difference do it make? So what? I shouldn't even have answered. I should have been like, nah, bro, I'm gay as fuck. But I only fuck non-binary people. Like what difference does it fucking make? Like, who cares? Are you straight? I just have to know. Like, why is it any of your business who the fuck someone else sleeps with? And then too, I'm not even convinced. No longer. I used to be when I was more pig-headed in the 90s. But now I'm convinced that sexuality is a spectrum. You know what I'm saying? Like, there could be, for instance, there's those chicks who 99% of the year, they only fuck with dudes. But then maybe on their birthday, they'd like to get their pussy eaten by another female. Or maybe they like to eat some pussy themselves. Some shit like this. Does that make her gay? Does that make her bisexual now? Does that make her a lesbian just because she likes to get gay every now and then? You know what I mean? No. To me, it doesn't count. If someone robs a bank one time and never robs or steals ever again, they just did that one time because they were desperate, does that make them a criminal? They're just a hard, lifelong criminal or a career criminal because that one time they committed one crime. No, in my opinion, no. I'm sorry. It takes more than that. You're not a serial killer if you kill one person. No, you gotta like kill a couple people before you can get that title. You know what I'm saying? And that's how it is for me. You're not a criminal because you committed one fucking crime. I mean, technically, we're all fucking criminals. You know what I'm saying? If you've ever had a drink or smoked something and you weren't 18 yet, or 21, if depending, you know, if it was alcohol, or if you had sex with someone and you weren't 18 yet, you were 16, having sex with your 15-year-old girlfriend, or whatever the situation was, or maybe you were a teenage girl having sex with your 20-something-year-old boyfriend, and that's a crime, you know, or perhaps maybe you threw your cigarette butt on the ground, or maybe you threw some trash out your car window. All of that is crime, 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 crime. You crossed the street and it wasn't at a crosswalk. You sped up when you were supposed to slow down at the yellow light. Shut the fuck up. Everybody's career criminals at this point. You know what I'm saying? So what are we talking about here? What makes one a career criminal and one not? When we're all breaking the law all the motherfucking time. You know what I'm saying? Get the fuck out of here. Right, exactly, bro. We jaywalk all day, every day. Like, sometimes I just walk in the street. Like, fuck it, you know. Hey, are any of my, I don't think any of my, moderated, man, it's getting dark up. You know what? I'm about to get off of this. It's getting dark. It's raining outside. And I need to find a different place with better lighting. Like I said, I'll be back on probably like around 2 o'clock. So I'll see y'all then, and hopefully the lighting will be better. Thanks for watching, and I'll answer more of y'all's questions there. Hey, Boogie. If you can, man, come back at 2 o'clock, all right? Because I'm going to need a moderator. Or if you see Mary Jane or Tin Man, I need one of them, you know what I'm saying, to like, I need y'all to moderate. Because I'm not about to have this bullshit. I mean, I guess you can say it, because this motherfucker was in here talking about free Israel from Hamas. Nigga, Hamas ain't got no fucking power. Shut the fuck up. Fuck Israel. But anywho, and I don't mean the people of Israel. I just mean the government, the oppressive ass government, because there are Israelis who are against what their government is doing in Gaza. So thank you for those Israelis with a conscience. But anyway, yeah, I'll get back on at 2 o'clock, and which isn't that long from now. It's like 25 minutes. So I'll see y'all then. Boogie.